Today I'm going to talk about Visual Studio projects and the configuration files and the issues with them. When I talk about configuration files, I mean the XML-based web and app.config files that are included in projects. And there are, in my opinion, some issues with these configuration files. First, perhaps you have some settings that are available for your whole development team. And then you have, like, if you upgrade a NuGet package, perhaps you get an assembly dependency added or some new settings added. So you need to keep track of those if one developer installs one and modifies the web config or the app config. All other in the team needs to have this setting as well. Then you can have some own settings. Perhaps you have a different connection to the connection string to your database, or are currently trying out some other connection, or specific paths to folders in your environment. Of course, you can have your own settings file, a configuration file, and not source control it. But if you don't, how to share your team settings, and if you upgrade something, perhaps you need to share those settings with the rest of the team. To solve the issues with the configuration file, we need to have it source controlled to share our settings. We need to have different team settings, but we also should support user-specific settings. And my solution to this is to use XDT transformations and add transformations for team and specific users, and perhaps different settings for the build server or target deployment server or whatever. And these transformations should be executed on build, so when I build my solution I get my settings, and when another user builds, their settings should be applied. I have a small package that you could use that's called Meriworks.PowerShell.ConfigBuilder that I will demonstrate here. Meriworks.PowerShell.ConfigBuilder is a NuGet package. You can get the source from GitHub. And on GitHub there is also documentation for this package. And mainly you can do two things, but the one we are looking on today is the merge function. And the merge is triggered by naming or creating an XDT file and naming it according to the file you want to merge your changes into. So for instance, if you have a web project and you have a web config file and you want to create a merge file for it, then you create it and name it like file name, extension like web config, then you add .merge, and the keyword and value are optional. And so in its simplest example, you name it file name or web config merge.xdt. So for instance, if we would like to remove the debug as if we deploy to release, we have an XDT file here, and it will do on compilation, will it remove the debug attribute. So we can create a new file, or just we do a copy of this one. We remove those just not to have a simple file. We name it web config merge xdt. Okay, and if we take the contents of this release file and place it here, and strip the comments just to be sure. An XDT file is in fact just a normal XML file, but with the addition to this namespace, the XDT namespace. And this, there are two attributes, if you're not familiar with XDT files, two attributes that controls the transformation. So the XDT transform tells what this node should do. Location, we are going to look at that in a moment, but this transformation will, if the debug attribute exists in the compilation node, it will remove it. So in this case, in system web compilation, we have debug set to true, and the merge file says remove it. One thing we need to do, of course, is to add the NuGet package. So if we check NuGet.org and search for Meriworks, there we have the Meriworks.PowerShell.ConfigBuilder, and we press install. Okay, so we press install. We do this manually. Install back PowerShell config builder. We get one. Okay, there were some glitches there, but it looks like we have check packages config 1515. Yeah. What this package does, it doesn't add any files. In fact, it only adds a entry in the CS project file to trigger this transformation before the building takes place. So we close this one. So when you build the project, before it starts building, it will take this merge file and process it, and process it in here. So when we build now, this attribute should be removed. And there it was gone. Okay, and you can check the log file and see when you build this, then it says running config builder, and it provides a link to the documentation, and it's locating the base file, the web config, and tells which files it merges with, since you can have multiple merges, one for your team and one for your specific use for your machine, and this merge, that is common, so it will enter those files it merges with. So this is a good way to debug which files are merged and which aren't. Okay, so this is a pretty basic example. Of course, you can do any merge as you would like to. For instance, you have if you have the data path, this is a classic example. I have my project on D proj folder. My colleague has on C, Git, whatever. So if you would like to sustain one configuration for everyone, but you know it's in fact a folder, a subfolder of the project, then you could in the merge file add some attributes. So if we add first the app settings key, and then add name, what's called, we add this one first, the data path. There you go. And instead to set this value, first we have to use the XDT values, XDT transform, and we use the set attributes. And since we have multiple add, we need to tell it should only modify the add key with where the key is data path. So we set XDT locator, and we add the function match, and since we need to match the key attribute, we add key as the attribute it should match on. So if I change this to data2 and then I compile, this value is changed to data2. One function that the config builder has is the ability to expand variables. And variables are denoted by this syntax, $sign and parenthesis and the variable name inside. And currently these 4 variables are supported. So for instance, wherever my project is located, I know that instead of this location, I say, well, it's the project folder, project directory, and in my project directory I have a subfolder named subfolder. When I do this compilation, this will expand this variable to the project folder and then append my own subfolder. So if user 1 has their project folder on C, it doesn't matter, since when you compile it again, the correct path is set. Okay, so that's the team part. Then perhaps on my computer I have a database, but I have 2 databases. So I have one at my server, and then I have a SQL Express server. But this setting is only for me, so I don't want to mess it up for everyone else. In that case, we have another syntax, and that's the host keyword. Yeah, well, a short introduction in keywords. As I said before, the keyword part is optional. You will work fine with the file name extension merge xdt, but with the keyword you can control where this transformation or when it should happen. Pre is a signal to do this transformation first, even before the actual merge, the merge xdt file. First we have pre, then we have the normal merge, then we have a keyword called step, and if you have a number of steps, the value will be sorted alphabetically, and then you can have step 1, step 2. If you go by numbers, you can name it 001 and so forth. The third keyword, host, this will trigger a merge if the value matches the computer's name. So for instance, if you, like in my case, my computer is called Xeno. So if I would like to have a merge file that is only processed on my machine, I can name it like this. So I can do a copy of this file, and after the merge I press enter the key name host and then Xeno. So if I open this, let's remove these ones. These aren't interesting for me, but I would like to have a connection strings there. I can do a copy of this connection strings in here. So this is the base version, but I would like to modify this to my own settings. I don't need to change the provider name, so I can skip that attribute totally. But I would like to set attributes and match, not by key this time, but I would like to match with the name attribute. So in my case, I would like to use my SQL Express database server, and in that case my database is called something else, B5 perhaps, and I have a super secret password. So when I do this transformation again, we can see that the connection string on the web.config has been merged to the value in my custom Xeno file. So, and we can check the output and see what's happened. First it starts with the web.config, and then it merges this, the merge file, and then my own file. But I have another colleague whose machine is called something else. Something else. He uses my database version 4 and has another secret password. So if I do this again, we can check the output that it didn't process the something else file, since the host name doesn't match. So I can keep my settings here and modify as I would like to, and my colleague can use their files, and you can build a whole library of config files depending on the machine that you are compiling it on. And you can also make a configuration file for the build server if you want to have specific settings for the build server. That's also applicable. But as you see now, I have my settings have been set in this file, and if I would like to have some default settings that are applied to every user, I can do that by adding them in the merge file or in the pre file. So if we add the standard settings here, we have this not so super super secret password and the default database, or my database, whatever it's called. This will be the default settings. So if you're not running on Xeno or something else, this will be the only file that it will be merged. So depending on what's in the web.config file, if I, for instance, rename this to another name and compile again, we will get the default settings that are applied in the merge file. So this is the way we are dealing with the merge files and compiling them. The pros of this is that if you install anything in like update NuGet package and you get some new dependent assemblies redirection to new versions, then you can still keep checking in the web.config file. Keep in mind that your settings, since you check in the web.config file, can pollute other systems. So if they don't have the their own host file, merge file, or if no standard default settings are set in the default merge file, then it can be troublesome. And when you get the new version, you need to recompile to be sure to have the correct settings. You can also do conditional merging depending on what type of configuration you have. So that's also a keyword. So configuration is a keyword, and you can put as value any configuration you have. You can have custom configurations. So we can try this by using the standard, like having the compilation debug true and debug false on debug or release. And we can start with copy this one. We rename it to merge configuration release, and then we have one that's called debug. So the release, we can take away everything that hasn't anything to do with release. So in release we can do this, remove attribute debug, but in debug we would like to compilation debug true. Transformation is then set at attributes. So if I'm in release mode and compile, oops, sorry, I closed that one, shouldn't do that. We have compilation with no debug set. If I switch to debug and recompile, we get the debug true. And you can of course do any type of, you can do like debug false instead, if that's better for your liking. Just do debug false, switch to release, recompile, and debug false is set. So this I use all the time, both for web projects but also on standard class libraries or unit testing. It's perfect for pointing out resource folders or whatever you would like to. There are some few more details about this, but you can read that in the documentation. But I recommend this for you. An extra thing is that the package is marked as development dependency, which means that it won't, if you create a NuGet package out of your project, it will not propagate as a requirement or dependency for that NuGet package. So things to keep in mind, but if you think you could use this, you're welcome to do so. And if you have some questions or ideas, don't hesitate to contact me. Thank you for listening.